Hello and welcome to the UN World Data Forum Thematic Area 5, where we are focused on trust, privacy, and data governance. Our discussion today coincides with World Statistics Day, which is being celebrated around the globe today with the theme, Connecting the World with Data We Can Trust. So we, my friends, are in good company around the world today. My name is Sarah Lucas from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation in the United States, and I'll be your moderator today. As you look across all of the sessions associated with Thematic Area 5 on the World Data Forum agenda, you see a lot of things. You see reference to national statistical offices leading the way in building trustworthy data ecosystems. You see data for good initiatives that bring together public and private sector collaboration. You see reference to taking holistic and balanced approaches to data governance. And you see lots of attention to data responsibility during COVID. You also see reference to many forms of data: official statistics, citizen-generated data, AI-based algorithms, geospatial and mobile phone data. So how do all these disparate pieces fit together under one thematic area? Well, the answer in my mind is fairly simple, and it is that ensuring trust in data is really a society-wide endeavor. It takes all of us. A large diversity of actors throughout government, not just data protection commissions or national statistical offices, but other parts of government, civil society, private sector, need to act in concert and actually sometimes in conflict to ensure that data are produced and used in ways that both enable beneficial outcomes for people and that protect their privacy and their security. We're going to hear from folks from across the societal spectrum today, and you're going to hear them talking about building trust and data protection and data governance at a lot of different levels. So you'll hear some talking about global standards that guide all countries. You'll hear some talking about policy and regulatory frameworks at a national level, or legal agreements and contracts that govern specific data partnerships. You might hear about privacy enhancing technologies, and I know you'll hear about the norms and values that societies deliberate in order to foster trust. You'll hear about the role of external advocates and citizen accountability for governments. At this plenary session, we'll be setting the table with all of these issues that you'll be able to dig into more deeply in other thematic area 5 sessions. We're also going to use the COVID pandemic or pandemics and crisis responses in general as a launching pad for talking about the future. For example, we might ask, how can what we've learned in data protection and use during COVID inform how we use data to accelerate progress on the SDGs? We might also ask, now that a lot of countries have ramped up quite sensitive data use during the COVID pandemic, what does it look like to roll those back after the pandemic is over, if it is ever over? And what have we learned about the gaps in policy guidance at the global or national level that really need to be filled as we move forward? So we have 6 terrific speakers today. You can see them on your screen. Their full bios are available on Attendify, so I'll just make their intros brief. And as you listen to these 6 extraordinary people, I invite you to listen for common themes that come from their different perspectives. I expect that one theme you'll hear is around collaboration or maybe contention across different parts of society. Another theme is you might hear some common principles, like transparency of decision-making, or proportionality in data use, or confidentiality in handling sensitive data. So let us know what common themes you are hearing or what questions you have. You can use the chat function in Attendify. You'll see it just to the right of the video screen. And the World Data Forum Secretariat team, amazing that they are, will be synthesizing your questions. They'll be sharing them with us so that we can bring your voices into this conversation. So let's dive in. We are going to start with Jenny Tennyson. Jenny is Vice President and Chief Strategy Advisor at the Open Data Institute in the UK. Jenny, I'm hoping you can kick us off with a view from civil society. What are the big issues that we should be thinking about when it comes to data protection, oversight, and use from your perspective and that of your colleagues? Please, Jenny.
Thanks very much, Sarah, and thank you so much for having me here today. So I think that the pandemic and the emergency response has really thrown into relief issues that actually we struggle with all the time around the use of data, particularly about people and communities, and how we minimize harms and maximize benefits, both at that kind of personal level and at that community level. And it's really highlighted for me that good governance isn't just about shutting down and preventing use and protecting from harms, but also about collecting new sources of data, enabling use, opening up, right? And getting both of those right is really important and is what leads to the benefits to both that kind of personal and community level. It's also highlighted that good governance is increasingly not about what individual organizations do themselves, but also about how the ecosystem of organizations interacts with each other. The role, as you were saying, Sarah, of governments, of academia, of civil society, of communities, of businesses in the whole endeavor. And so what that means is the kind of government role needs to be to enable those other organizations to act well within that ecosystem. It means governments, international organizations, and so forth acting as information and data intermediaries, enabling others to get hold of the information that they need. And, you know, two places where I'd really highlight that is first of all around building trust in governments, and secondly around enabling distributed action. So you know, we live in an environment where we're concerned about whether the government and those supposedly acting on our behalf have the right information, whether they're taking the right action, whether the applications that they're providing us with are going to be used for our benefit. And having transparency proactively around those enables scrutiny, which is completely necessary for building trust in what government action is going on, and also good old-fashioned journalism to help explain to people what the situation is and prevent kind of misinformation and rumors that would otherwise dog our actions. And the second area, so that's about transparency. The second area where making data available is really important is enabling distributed, locally, loosely coordinated action, which was what we really need in this environment that is complex, that is changing, where people need to be able to act on a local level and with their communities in order to get the right response. So getting information into their hands so that they can take action, informed action, is really crucial. So that's all I wanted to say to kind of set the scene, just that building trust requires transparency, requires scrutiny, requires the action of all of these other things. But we really shouldn't neglect that good governance is also about opening up and enabling others to act, as well as constraining access to data.
Jenny, thank you for kicking us off with such excellent themes. I love this notion of good governance is also about enabling use and the relationship between transparency, scrutiny, and trust. I think we'll hear more about scrutiny when we get to Aiden at the very least. I'd like to turn it over now, moving from a civil society perspective to a private sector perspective. I'd like to bring in Ms. Oyoronke Oyotunde. She is the head of regulatory affairs at the MTN Group, which is a multinational mobile telecommunications company based in South Africa. Oyoronke, I'm hoping that you can share with us more about how MTN Groups protects privacy and maintains trust, not only with your customers and within the company, but in your collaborations with government actors and partners. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. It's really an honor, pleasure to be here. At MTN, our customers are at the heart of everything that we do. and therefore respecting confidentiality of information given to us by our customers is a fundamental part of our operations. I would like to start briefly by highlighting the essence of data to us today. Data for us is a fundamental asset of every person and an integral part of their identity, whether it be in their physical life or online. And the right to own data is increasingly recognized in many jurisdictions. Reflecting on this position, in most of the jurisdictions covered by MTN, the obligation to ensure the confidentiality of personal information is enshrined in our operating licenses. Preserving the privacy of our customers and protecting their personal information is an integral part of our operations. By handling such data, the obligation that we have, it's not just critical, but we need to make sure that we're promoting the requisite trust, choice, and transparency, in terms of our custodianship of such information. In the words of the GSMA, which is our industry body, they have a report on smart data privacy laws published in 2019. If individuals trust the organization that use their data, then governments, industries, including the mobile industry, can benefit through the greater uptake of such technology and business ideas. We also can increase economic activity and promote a thriving, digitally enabled population. For us, that in a nutshell is the crux of everything that we do from an industry perspective. And trust is key for us. Trust is an asset which enhances reputation, strengthens consent, and delivers for us as an operator the competitive advantage in the commercial context. Two aspects of that trust is stewardship and teamwork. With regard to stewardship, at MTN, we have internal protocols, policies, and processes that guide and govern the way we handle customer data. In terms of teamwork, it involves ensuring that we partner and collaborate with governors, government, regulators, and stakeholders, such as civil society organizations, and so on. And for us, there are two points that I wish to make. It is important for us that we respect lawful and legitimate expectations and processes. And what this requires from our context is ensuring that the data we get, we use to provide regulatory services. Also, that data that we have is sometimes given to regulators to help them provide the regulatory services that they are statutorily empowered to do, such as maybe monitoring quality of service KPIs and things like that. And also in many of the environments in which we operate, law enforcement, we are obliged to assist law enforcement agencies in their investigations, maybe say, for example, for the investigation of crime or the issuance of a court order. Apart from that, we also, as operators, we promote regulatory certainty and legal justification by engaging with our policymakers and regulators to ensure that the requisite regulatory framework exists where there are gaps. Say, for example, when the pandemic started, in South Africa, we were able to support the government in issuing the right kind of regulations to support the assistance that operators would be providing. Say, for example, the dissemination of information, supporting national responses, and ensuring the continuity of services during the period of the pandemic. With reference to the COVID pandemic, the work and the role of mobile operators is very clear. One, ensuring network stability. Two, ensure connecting vital services such as medical and emergency services. Three, supporting payment systems such as zero rating mobile money transactions. And four, supporting government efforts. And this is twofold. Number one, by disseminating vital information on behalf of governments to citizens. And two, by supporting collaborative efforts of national governments. And in this regard, I think I'll just hone in on that last point, the supporting collaborative efforts. The issue of big data comes up in so many ways. And where this is involved, there are the following considerations. I'll just go very quickly through it. Number one, ascertaining and observing provisions of extant laws relating to privacy and cybersecurity in the various countries in which we operate. Number two, ensuring that the role that we play is lawful, necessary, and proportionate. Number three, where there's a pandemic, making sure that there are strong national, whereas in the pandemic, where there are strong national security and public interest concerns, it is important that we refer all requests for collaboration, data sharing, and analytics to governments. And then another thing that we also take cognizant of is to make sure that where we follow and comply with legal and regulatory prescriptions. Apart from that, we also have sorry about that, I do apologize. Where there's a take-up of big data, there were two examples that we had. Number one, with regard to the Africa COVID Communication and Information Platform. And the second was with regards to in Nigeria, where our OPCO, our operator, in our company, our MTN Nigeria, collaborated with economic partners, experts, and the Governors Forum in order to provide some sort of predictive, they provided a proactive predictive overview of the likely risks of the pandemic. And the second thing was to provide insights into location clusters. There are quite a number of issues that I'd like to, well, the bottom line for us is in terms of recommendations, it's important that lessons that we've learned with regard to the pandemic include making sure that we're able to enhance the provision of intelligence services, ensuring that there are adequate protocols in terms of preparing for the pandemic. Also, the issue of ethical and the lawful use of big data is very key for us. And also making sure that we're able to encourage the emergence of an enriched public digital data service in Africa, particularly where there's a responsible use of big data to support national interest concerns. I think I'll stop at this stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Oyeronke. You know, I'm going to resist the temptation to ask you a question, but I think I will just say for future in our conversation that I'm sure all of our interest was piqued the minute you said that you share data with law enforcement. And so there's so much effort that you make to foster trust and have the right protocols in place. And then just that one line, we're like, what? So I think we'll want to circle back a little bit on proportionality, transparency, trust, and who is making decisions about how data are used. This is a really important part of the societal push and pull about what is acceptable use of data. So I'm not even, unfortunately, going to give you a second to respond to that, but let's come back to it and just use it as an example of how hard it is sometimes to strike this balance of trust. Okay, having heard a bit from outside of government, I'd like to turn now to someone who is right in the very heart of government data use and production. Carol Coy is Director General of Statistics Institute in Jamaica. And Carol, data protection and privacy considerations are not new to national statistical offices. So remind us what NSOs are already doing in the regard of data protection and privacy, and how you see NSOs fitting into this broader set of actors working on data protection in governance at the national level. Over to you, Carol.
Thanks, Sarah. As you said, speaking from the perspective of government, a National Statistics Office, for most NSOs, building trust in official statistics is one of the main areas that we focus heavily on. And what this has done is made national statistics offices, especially the demand for data, more accountable, because persons want to know how are you treating their data. The demand for this data, the increase in demand has come about, as has been mentioned, with the advent of COVID, and also with the progress towards the development of the SDGs. One of the tenets of the SDGs is to leave no one behind. And the assumption behind this is that you're going to provide data at a level that persons can make decisions. And it's the same thing with COVID. For COVID, governments they're trying this balancing act of saving lives and saving livelihood. And so they need that information. So for most statistics office, what we have to be doing is we have to build this balance between the provision of this type of data and data at this level and maintaining confidentiality. And there are two aspects to it. As you mentioned before, there's the issue of maintaining the confidentiality of data. In most statistics offices, the legislation guides this. Most statistics office, you'll find that confidentiality is a part of their Statistics Act. And the UN Fundamental Principles, in effect, speaks of Principle 6, individual data collected by statistical agencies for statistical compilation, whether they refer to natural or legal persons, are to be strictly confidential and used exclusively for statistical purposes. So how do we do this balance of maintaining confidentiality and at the same time providing data that is critical for decision making? NSOs have been employing a number of techniques over the years. Data anonymization is a critical part. It, however, requires training. And as we see in recent years, especially I know in our region in the Caribbean, we have been getting assistance in developing this technique so that you can provide this data at this level, but at the same time maintain privacy of our respondents. Some agencies also provide microdata in a controlled environment. And what this does is allows researchers to come in to their offices under controlled, as I said, controlled environment, research, do the data, but what it does at the same time, it maintains the privacy of the information you're working with. We have to develop memorandum of understanding with some of our users. If we allow you access to the data, you cannot produce this data so that you can identify persons. So these are ways that we have been using. But what is now critical is ensuring the security of the data. With the advancement in technology, NSOs now have this increasing ability to process, store, and distribute data. We also have access to administrative data, which provides data at a very granular level. We have access, as it spoke about, as was said about earlier by one speaker, to big data. And so it is critical for NSOs to ensure the security of this data. It's not just the confidentiality. And an important consideration now for NSOs is to limit the risk of data breaches. In most countries, at least in a number of countries, governments have introduced the data protection legislation. So that in itself holds NSOs accountable. But what will also have to happen is NSOs now, especially in developing countries where resources are limited, we have to be making significant investment in your IT infrastructure to improve data security. We now have things like encryption of data because we're now collecting data digitally. So how do you ensure that there's no breach between the transmission data collection and it gets to your head office? So these are things we have to be building, things like firewalls. So what has really a new feature, not really a new, but an additional feature that NSOs have to look at is also critical risk management. Data security is now a critical part of our risk management process. And so these are ways in which we now have to ensure, because one of the things is for NSOs, as I say, one data breach will impact your ability to collect data in the future. Thanks.
Carol, you so beautifully illustrated all of these levels, right? Responding to global standards, having national policy and regulation in place, having internal practices, and having technological approaches to data security. And you've illustrated something that I just pushed Oyeronke on, which is even if you have 50 approaches to building trust and confidentiality, if one thing goes wrong, one breach goes wrong, one misuse of data, it blows it all. And so it's you feel kind of how tenuous and precarious that is. And I feel for you on that. We're going to turn it over to audience questions in a minute, but I'd like each of the three of you to just take 1 minute. If you had to kind of think about one thing that we should be learning from this COVID experience, that we are taking into the future about how we use data, either to accelerate SDGs or to further develop data governance, can you each just take 1 minute to say what is one lesson that we should be taking from COVID forward? And I think I'll just go backwards in the order of speakers. So I'll turn to Carol, you first, and then Oyeronke, and then we'll close with Jenny, and then we'll turn to audience questions. So Carol, one takeaway from COVID for the future.
One takeaway for us is that data is critical and data has to be provided quickly and at a granular level at the same time as maintaining confidentiality, because you cannot make decisions unless you have data at a level that governments can make decisions, because COVID, it affects different segments of the population differently. And so you have to provide this information so that they can make this decision.
Oyeronke, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think for me, I think it's very key and important for all the stakeholders that handle that data. They need to know exactly what to do and how to do it. So in terms of making sure that we have the requisite laws, protocols, responsibilities, it's important we have that. And even prior to that, I think there is a need in many countries. There's a need for a dialogue, public debate on exactly what data is to be used and how it is to be used, by whom, what and when. Particularly with this pandemic, in our own environment, quite a lot of the governments really didn't know, they didn't even adopt it. Quite a lot of people just pushed it away. And even in that respect, handling that information is very, very key. And in many of the environments in which we operate, we actually don't have privacy laws yet. So it's more of the licenses and the obligations we have with our customers that we observe. Obviously, in many places, the Constitution actually recognizes the right to confidentiality of information and things like that. So that's what we had to respect. But I think that for us, particularly in Africa, it's a growth area. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Jenny.
I suppose for me, we tend to think of data as being a new form of infrastructure. So it's something that we have to build and invest in and create in much the same way as we do road networks or electricity networks or whatever. So for us, then having that robust data infrastructure is really important for responding to crises rapidly. But what really has come out to me during the crisis that we really need to learn is to make sure that infrastructure is adaptable to changing needs. So we've seen across the last 6 months or so how we need data at different kinds of aggregation levels, being able to understand the different communities being affected in different kinds of ways. We've seen, even in the UK, data missing on crucial things like what's going on in care homes, right? So there's been missing data, and there's been missing data at missing granularity of data that has limited our ability to respond. But in some ways, we only know that that we need to do that when the urge comes along. So we have to make sure that the data infrastructure that we're building is robust enough, adaptable enough, that we have the good institutions that are able to respond quickly to those new pressures, whether those are requirements or new norms, in order to create data infrastructure and provide the data infrastructure that we need to make our decisions on.
Excellent, thank you. And this idea of you only know what you're going to need when you need it, leading to this need for adaptable, fluid discussions, right? Okay, so let's turn to some questions from the audience. We've got some big ones. So I'm gonna read this one first. It says, I agree that data governance is extremely important, but it takes a long time to build the frameworks, as it requires consensus between many and among many stakeholders. At the same time, data is required in a timely manner, especially during pandemics. How do we balance these needs? And you've each spoken to this a little bit about, you have to be able to act quickly, but you identify gaps in your systems. And I think, Oyeronke, you started to speak a little bit to where there are policy and regulatory gaps, how you fill those gaps with technical agreements or legal agreements or things like that. So very interested to hear from you all. What gaps have you seen, and kind of how do you manage this temporal problem? We might not have the full regulatory frameworks in place, but we need to protect data and use it now. So maybe, Carol, can I start with you? Any experiences from Jamaica that you can share with us to this question?
Okay, with the outbreak of COVID, the Ministry of Health and my agency, we formed a research group, a COVID research group. And what it did was it pulled researchers from both private and public sector and from academia. And because the creation of this group, what it actually did was to allow us to access data from a number of areas. And speaking of the telecom providers, we have never done a telephone survey, and we really needed to do a telephone survey quickly to get at the perceptions and the knowledges and practices behind COVID. And so we had to work closely. And it's because we had set up this research group, pulling in both private and public sector and academia, that we were able to get consensus around getting access to this data. But at the same time, because of our agency using that confidentiality to ensure the confidentiality of that data.
Well, and that speaks a lot to kind of who's making decisions and whether the public understands who it is that's at the table making decisions. Jenny or Oyeronke, do either one of you want to come in on this question of how we fill gaps and we don't have the frameworks we need yet?
Okay. I think for us, the pandemic in many of the environments in which we operate was very new. And in terms of knowing what to do, it was very difficult. For us as operators, we defer to our regulators in most instances. So it's a matter of touching base with the regulator. This is what is going on. We received quite a lot of requests for apps and things like that would help to locate people and so on and so forth, in terms of location data, and things like that. However, everything that we received, we automatically referred it to our regulator. Apart from that, in many countries, in quite a lot of countries, such as in South Africa, for example, they immediately convened a stakeholder consultation. And within a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, they already knew, they were able to fashion out, this is what we require. These are the protocols we require. And they issued a direction. And that direction assisted all the stakeholders within that ecosystem as to what role they were supposed to play, what they were supposed to do, and where they were supposed to step in. Apart from that, within the telecoms industry or the ICT industry as a whole, there were two things that we also had. The GSMA, which is our industry body, global industry body, brought out the COVID-19 privacy guidelines, which helped to guide quite a lot of operators all over the world. Apart from that, We also had the UN 75 Partnership Dialogue for Connectivity, which was issued in conjunction with the ITU and other industry bodies. And that in itself provided us with guidelines and some guidance as to how to proceed, and it became a reference point for quite a lot of industry players, the industry ecosystem as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And to add to those things, I suppose one thing I pull out is it is possible to have those kinds of consultations quickly. It is possible to do that within a week. It's not as if information governance and data governance processes have to take ages and ages. But even when they do, and you're not convinced that they're perfect in their first form, I think it's incredibly important to be proactively communicate about what you're up to, so that nobody is surprised. Because what really diminishes trust is when there's a surprise about the way in which data is used, even if it's wrong, right? Even if people don't agree with it, better to be upfront and communicate about it than to have them surprised and then say that it's wrong. And I also think the other thing is to build in reflection to the way in which data has been shared. Agreements that are set up for the next 5 years or 20 years are not do not induce trust, because we don't know what that might mean in those kinds of timescales, right? How things might change in those kinds of timescales. So setting some rules and guidance kind of now. But also saying, and we're going to review them properly in 6 months' time, and then again in 6 months after that. I think setting up that as an expectation is a way of building trust in your processes over time.
Thank you so much. I think that, policymakers are not often rewarded when they change their minds. And so you're really underscoring this need for adaptive governance that is built on changing as we go and as we identify needs and as we learn. I think that's a really important theme to underscore as we transition to the next phase of our discussion. And I apologize, everyone. I should have explained to you that I'm not ignoring our other three speakers, but we're having kind of two sequential conversations. So we're now going to turn to our other three who have been patiently waiting, and I'm sure you're dying to hear from them. So for the second segment, we're really going to kick it off. We've been talking about mostly what's happening at a national level, but I want to really step back here. We're so fortunate to have Samira Asma from the World Health Organization with us. She serves as the Assistant Director General for the Division of Data Analytics and Delivery for Impact. Might we all have that kind of job, delivering impact? And before I turn to you, Samira, I just want to acknowledge and thank you and all of your colleagues at WHO who are tirelessly and fearlessly guiding us through this pandemic. We need you and we thank you. I say that as an American. And I would like to turn to you to help us think about how WHO thinks about data governance and the role that international organizations like WHO can play in not only setting standards, but setting examples. So we've heard from some of our earlier speakers about looking to global standards for national applications. So talk us through what that looks like from your perspective at WHO. You're still on mute. It takes teamwork. Yay.
Does it work?
Good. Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you so much.
Great. Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Sarah. And it is wonderful to hear the earlier panelists and the ones that will be following me. I want to thank the UN Statistics Division for having the foresight to discuss this important topic. Data is the basis of public health action, and rapid data sharing is critical during the times of emergencies. And trust is the DNA of our work. If people lose trust in official numbers, then we lose everything. As Edward Deming, noted statistician, said, "In God we trust, all others must bring data." So the urgency to respond to COVID has posed new challenges. Along with urgency to respond to the emergency, we also have flourishing technology solutions and data revolutions which can advance evidence-based policies and programs and also help us to reach the vulnerable. And it's not easy, but it is very imperative to always keep citizens' rights front and center as we respond to the pandemic now and as well as during non-emergency situations. So safeguarding privacy and ensuring data governance are important steps for maintaining trust. The right to privacy is maintained by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 12. So that is the spring and the foundation for all the multilateral organizations. Today, I would like to focus on 3 specific data challenges and highlight their importance to a coordinated and successful COVID response, that is trust, privacy, and governance. Let me get to trust. This year's theme for the World Statistics Day today is trust, and could not have come at the most appropriate time. Trust is the basis for partnership. Trust is the basis for preparedness. Trust is the basis for response, and trust is the basis to rebuild. During a pandemic, effective risk management requires timely, reliable, actionable, and empathetic communication. And with infodemics on the rise, WHO has responded with a joint statement together with all our UN partner agencies and other partners to combat the spread of misinformation, both now and as we go forward. And we have also seen public-private partnership coming together to address infodemics. We are also responding with tools and training and a coordinated approach to build the capacity. We know we cannot completely eliminate it, but we can effectively manage it. Second, privacy. If we don't protect privacy, then as data stewards, we betray our most basic promise. Public health decision-making based on real-time data and open access to save lives is very important. But this requires clear ethical, financial governance frameworks so that it guides us as to how we share data, when we share data, and with whom we share data, while protecting sensitive and personal information. And technology does offer that option where we can uphold the privacy of the citizens. Finally, data governance. And if we don't put in place good data governance and robust practices, not on paper, but in action, to protect the quality and impartiality of our statistics, it is difficult to be trusted. The UN Fundamental Principles of Official Statistics and UN Quality Assurance frameworks provide us the means and the roadmap to ensure measures for trust, privacy, and governance that should be implemented and should be used. Some of the solutions and approaches that WHO is taking are the 3 I would like to highlight today that is in accordance with the UN data principles. Yesterday, WHO updated its data principles and data sharing policy, especially during non-emergency situations, which is a good foundation for us for data governance. And the 5 principles are that we treat data as a public good. We uphold our member states' trust in data. We are regarded and act as responsible data stewards. And we support countries and our partners in strengthening their capacity so that we address data gaps, so that we can have reliable, timely, and actionable data during the emergency as well as during routine situations. We are also updating the Gather guidelines, the guidelines for accurate and transparent health estimate reporting. Gather is a best practice to calculate health estimates using multiple information sources for multiple populations in time and space. This is very important. Third, WHO is tracking progress towards the 59 health-related SDG indicators. And we will soon be launching a public version of the Triple Billion Dashboard. Triple Billion is a strategy for WHO to move us rapidly towards progress that we make towards SDG by 2030. And that is to ensure universal health coverage, have 1 billion people at least prepared for health emergencies, and 1 billion more enjoying healthier lives. And we want to have validated, reliable data, and we are in the process of consulting the data validity with countries. And this process has worked very well to build the trust and to ensure the data that we will be sharing is consulted and approved by the member states. Finally, my comment is we were already not on track to meet SDGs and the WHO's triple billion targets before COVID. And we are now more off track. So the data principles, the data sharing policies underpinned by data governance is going to be extremely crucial for us all if we ought to meet 2030. But the question is, do we do it now or do we wait until 2030? I think the answer is very easy and simple. So thank you so much again. Look forward to questions and further discussion, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I love that you underscore both global standards and institutional practices and empathetic communication. Because at the end of the day, that trust building is really a person-to-person exercise. And so thank you for underscoring that, and also for underscoring in your last remark that data protection is an enabler and an accelerator rather than a hindrance. And so I think that's a really important kind of principle and theme to keep in mind. I'm going to turn now to Aidan Eyakuze, who's the Executive Director of Twaweza in East Africa. And Aidan, while our other speakers have represented civil society, private sector, government, international organizations, I think of you as representing citizens because of how Twaweza works to bring the voices of citizens into policy debates and to government accountability in the countries where you work. So help us bring the perspective of people into this discussion about data governance.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and it's fantastic to be a member of this group. I'm learning so much from my co-panelists. Thank you very much. So I want to tell you a couple of stories of the kind of things we've been doing just in the last 4 to 5 to 6 months. But let me preface those with a couple of sort of all-encompassing points. I want to start with a quote from Neil deGrasse Tyson, who is an astrophysicist. And he says there are 3 types of truth: personal truths, political truths, and objective truth. And this struck me when I was thinking about this panel. And there is, I think, for me, a tension that exists between these 3 types of truth, but especially between objective truth and political truth. And that tension, I think, is the most consequential. That's the tension that that tempts governments to, I'm going to say this, misbehave with and about data. Staying with astrophysics, data are sort of abstract representations of the truth, but which one do they represent, a political truth or objective truth? And I think many of us here will know about the heliocentric theory, you know, that the sun goes around the earth, and that was a very important objective truth. Or maybe it was a political truth for the powerful church back in the medieval times. Now, politically inconvenient data and objective truth can tempt authorities to massage it, to suppress it, or even to put it on lockdown. And in Tanzania, really, the data has been on lockdown. I'll explain a little bit further. And this is for us sort of the unsafe use or the misuse or even the disuse of data. And I think it was Jenny who was mentioning about the decisions we make about using data. You know, a very important decision is actually not to use data at all. You ignore it. You put it away and you make decisions based on other things. And that's the political truths that I think some are using. So in terms of the thing you mentioned earlier, yes, Twaweza has actually innovated Africa's first nationally representative mobile phone survey. It's been going on for about 7 years now. And it allows us really, as you said, to bring the voice and the experience and the opinion and the knowledge of ordinary citizens into public policy making in East Africa. And I won't go into the details of how this panel is all set up, but if you want to, you can look on our website. All of the information is there. But let me give you some examples of how we've used this during this time of the pandemic and how we have faced some challenges in my own country of Tanzania. In Tanzania, essentially, they decided that they did not want to know about how people are experiencing COVID, what knowledge gaps there were. We put our faith in prayer, which I think is very important. I'm not at all downplaying this, but also in, I think, a sense that if we push on through, we will not experience COVID in the same way as other countries have. And I have to say that I think we've been incredibly lucky in Tanzania. We have not escaped COVID, but I think we have not experienced the caseload or the deaths that are obvious to the naked eye that other countries have experienced. But then I think this is expressing the overall African experience with respect to the case fatality rate. However, so that's Tanzania. Essentially, we don't know. There's no official data around COVID beyond April 28th of 2020. But in Kenya and Uganda, we decided that we were going to poll citizens and get their knowledge and experience. What do they know about COVID and how do they feel about COVID in order to feel into the public domain? And I'll give you just 2 very quick insights. In Uganda, we discovered as early as April and May that people weren't really keen on using masks. They didn't really know about the use of masks. We put this out there. In fact, we shared the data with the authorities. And a couple of weeks later, the president himself showed up on one of his, I think, frequent addresses saying we now need to wear masks. Now, I'm not going to claim complete credit for that, but I think he may have been informed that this might be important. We found in a subsequent survey in 3 areas of Uganda, mask use has shot way up. It used to be below 5%. It's up at about 50 or 60%, at least people who know about the use of masks. And just last week, our Ugandan colleagues in Twaweza had some very fruitful meetings, again, with the authorities in the Ministry of Health who are managing the whole COVID response. And they have been asked to contribute to how to improve on the messaging around hygiene and safe practices to all of Uganda. We even supported a video, a very catchy video on using masks in Uganda. It's called Yambala Mask, and Yambala means wear your mask in Luganda. So this all came out from just understanding what people knew, what they felt, how they understood how to protect themselves from COVID. Let me finish with Kenya. Now, Kenya is a different insight that we got from there. Again, we did a survey around how do people know about COVID-19, but then we asked the question, how is COVID-19 influencing or affecting your livelihoods? And one thing that stood out very clearly for us is that urban Kenyans in the informal sector are suffering very heavily as a result of the lockdowns and the government response to COVID-19, very, very heavily. They are the ones who are probably most hardest hit with lockdown. And so this raises, again, a challenge or an issue for the government of Kenya to consider. How do you protect vulnerable populations, such as the young people, young men and women in the informal sector in Kenya's urban centers? How do they cope through this particular pandemic? And they're thinking about, I think, they have some initiatives. Kazi Mtaani, I think, is one of them in Swahili, sort of work, available for everybody on the street. Some of it's public works kind of thing. How that affects the spread of COVID is another issue altogether. But at least they're trying to do our version of furlough and this kind of thing as a result of of such insights. So let me conclude by saying this, that in the context of a pandemic, listening to citizens is absolutely vital. We can sit and collect administrative data and scientific data, etc., but not understand how citizens are really feeling, what they know about, and how they're engaging with a particular challenge or disaster that is facing to them. And having listened and having heard, it is absolutely important. It is vital for governments to be held to account for responding to the insights that the citizens are sharing through this collection of citizen-generated data. Thanks very much, Sarah.
So, Aiden, you're not only the voice of citizens, you are a citizen philosopher yourself. So thank you for bringing that big picture. And I think that this point that you're making about listening to citizens quickly, because they're going to be giving you rapid information about experiences, is really important. And I think through the stories that you've told, you've underscored that the citizen-state relationship doesn't have to be antagonistic. It is also supportive. No. And so I'm really grateful that you brought that in. So we're going to turn now to a completely different part of the world. We are going to turn to Mr. Setyaji, who is the head of the West Java Province ICT Agency and the former head of the Jakarta Smart City Unit. And I'm really excited to have you with us because, you know, this talking about citizens experience these trade-offs and tensions at a very local level. So we're looking forward to bringing us down to a more city and state level for this conversation. So tell us how these data governance dynamics play out at this more local level and how you can offer, maybe you can offer some examples from Jakarta or West Java that illustrate some of these themes and concepts that other speakers are highlighting today. Over to you and to your beautiful slides.
Thanks, Sarah. It's an honor for me among the great speakers. Yeah, the COVID-19, sorry, next slide. The COVID-19 has pushed the rapid development and usage of digital systems in governments as we need to limit face-to-face interactions. In West Java, we have always championed technological innovations, but this pandemic has brought digital governance to a whole new level. The need to enhance information transparency to go hand in hand with keeping the data secure. Next slide, please. For COVID-19 response, yeah, we built a platform we call the Picobar. Picobar is a West Java COVID-19 communications and response hub. We built in the web and mobile apps for real-time data publications. We also utilize the government application, a super app, we call the Sapa Warga, an app designed for affiliates or sub-district community leaders to support fast, digitalized, and contactless data verification processes for the social safety nets programs. Next, please. And because we gather the data, especially the critical data and also the sensitive data, so we need to make sure the data protection in our apps. Yeah, we separate the database for public and private purposes. For example, for public database, the attributes displayed are limited, excluding sensitive ones such as a name, social security number, and addresses. Whereas for purposes needing such sensitive attributes like social beneficiary's name, only for public monitoring, masking is provided. And we have access also to the civil registry databases from the Home Affairs Ministry, from which we cross-reference our social safety net programs, beneficiaries data too, and we also use a secure API key to bridge the access from these databases. And this is the identities of the beneficiaries are must to ensure privacy. As we also manage with Java COVID-19 data to publish publicity or privately for decision-making matters, we make sure that the name of confirmed patients are must and only their home location are used. Slide, please. And the next issue is we need to convince the agencies, assailants. Regional health agencies, for example, were reluctant to use our system due to privacy concerns. However, we have managed to ensure that we comply with data privacy rules Plus, we offer services to integrate the data of local health agencies with the national governments, so they don't need to adjust the API or system that they already have. We also use private services like public cloud. We, with the AWS and Google Cloud, we provide full managed services to make sure the data is secure. And our information security department does a security penetration test and collaborate with the national cybersecurity and IT community groups, such as Cyber Army for bounty bugs. And the Picobar app is also developed as an open source project. So we, with the community together, protect these systems. People can see the code and provide feedback if needed. For user privacy, the Picobar app always asks permission from the user if certain data is needed. For example, phone number, address, location, etc. Where users may deny access requests, the data collected from the app can only be accessed by limited teams with strict control mechanism. Next, please. And the next is, as you know, the government cannot run by itself. So we, with some community, academici, and we call the pentahelix, we together for data privacy and security. So in West Java, the government isn't shying away from collaboration with community groups or private entities. We work closely with the cloud services like AWS and Google Cloud to manage server and reliable data storage infrastructures. And also, we also collaborate with security system audit services and also the community to ensure our security system is appropriate by international standards like ISO 27000. And with this collaboration also with national cybersecurity industries and third partners, we improve the quality of our public services. So with these collaborations and some rules and etc., we balancing the use and also the secure our data. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much. And you know, you're the first in our panel to kind of use this term digital first, but I think this is a really important thing that is happening during COVID, right? Is the extreme reliance on digital tools where we might not have beforehand, and what that means for accelerating discussions around data governance. And I also really like how you illustrated that you can use technical solutions not only to preserve privacy, but to share and increase access of data through apps and things of that nature. So that really speaks to kind of how citizens are interfacing with the data that you are generating and using. So thank you so much for underscoring that. We have a lot of questions from the audience that I think can be summed up in, I'm going to clumsily sum them up in this way, which is who's making decisions? Who is and who should be making decisions about how data are used and governed? We have heard you all speak, and we've got questions around, you know, do we need a global data consensus or convention? Do we need kind of metadata standards across countries? And how are we making decisions at the country level? So help us understand, the three of you, with so many layers of frameworks, with so many people involved in decision making, who should be making what decisions and how? And what should we know about that? How should that be transparent? So it feels like kind of a complicated layer of decision making. So help us pull that apart. Who should be making what decisions, and what do we need to know about that? So let's go backwards again. Satyajit, I'm going to ask you to kind of grapple with this really big existential question that people are asking in a lot of different ways through the chat.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. This is the interesting questions. Yeah, as you know, we have many layers of the decisions here, from the central governments and then also the provincial level, and then also from the city levels. Yeah, actually, I'm me in the middle level, and actually this is the big question is we need action for fast. Yeah, we don't we can weight it the instruction or the regulation or standards, because as you know, the COVID-19 is, there is no big example. Because of that, we need to fast decisions and also use the data itself. We can weight the central government's directions. Because of that, we always innovations. We always trying to be the first for the sample, for publish the data itself, and also collect the data. Yeah, as you know, there is many sensitive data, a lot of sensitive data for the sample, for the name, for the use case. Yeah, for the case of the COVID-19. Yeah, the question is, we need to publish or not, because when we when we didn't publish, we cannot in the neighborhoods who has infected for the COVID-19. But if we publish this data, the COVID-19 infected is usually the citizen is make it some restricted, yeah, make it some I mean they usually to be I mean the COVID-19 infected is usually they didn't want to communicate and etc. So we decide we still provide this data, but we make it like some mask for this data. But for the contact tracing itself, we need this data because as you know, the contact tracing itself is a very important thing to limit it or to manage this COVID-19 decreasing. Yeah. So we actually we didn't wait the direction first to the central government, but we choose and then we started to publish, and also we didn't ask the central government, but we asked by self. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's so important to hear about how this is playing out at a local level, because we're getting, I mean, you should see the chat blowing up with questions about, do we need a global consensus to set standards on data governance? And who would even do that? And what does that even mean for someone working at a local level like you? So Aiden, I'm going to turn to you here on this, like who's making decisions? Do we need a global consensus? What does that even mean? And then I'll come to you, Samira, to close us out.
Thank you, Sarah. 75 years ago, we sort of agreed that the world needed a place to try and foster peace. After the disastrous Second World War, that place was called the United Nations. And like it or not, we've had to somehow cede some of our national sovereignty to the UN, you know, to run a few things. And we've had a relatively okay run of things for 75 years of the UN just last month. Here's another analogy. Who should make the decision about who runs our countries, who leads us, right? And what should we know about that? We make the decisions as people in democratic societies. We make those decisions, and we hope that the process is as transparent as possible, right? So we know everything about that process, who the candidates are, how many votes are counted, etc. I think we have some of those analogies, and you know, leading countries is a pretty big conundrum question that we continue to grapple with. So I think I want to use those analogies to answer the same question around data. You know, data, I think, for a healthy world is a public good. Yes, we know it's private sector, you know, my friends at MTN, or you know, you collect this data, you put all this infrastructure to collect this data, but you know, it's still a huge amount of it is a public good. So therefore, if we recognize it as that first, and I think one of the comments in the chat was saying that, how do you balance between the public good aspect of the data and the private asset aspect of data? MTN, how do you balance that? Private asset. But I think it's a public good. So if it is a public good, if we can agree more or less that it is, then it is the public who ought to make the decisions about the data, how data is used, how it's collected, and how it's protected, right? That's number one. And secondly, if it's the public to do it, then it should be a process that is as transparent as possible. Now, Let me end by saying this. I think there are two partnerships of which I am very proud to be a member. One is the Open Government Partnership, which is grappling with the great big huge questions of how you make governance much more transparent, responsive, and accountable. And there are all sorts of mechanisms in there which try to do that, which brings together government and civil society to try and achieve those ends at the local level and at the national level. And I think we're 10 years old, and I think some progress has been made, although the challenges are enormous. The second one is the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. And I think it is a fantastic partnership which tries to weave together academia, the United Nations systems, private sector, although we're struggling with the private sector a little bit there, and civil society to make sure that this data actually makes sense in terms of helping government make the right decisions about achieving SDGs and about monitoring SDGs. And in there, again, citizens play an important role to understand how the data is being used and what is the important data in order for those SDGs to be achieved that improves their own lives. So I'm all for, we have to cede some element of our own data sovereignty to a bigger, either national or global institution to be able to make good decisions about this.
Well, that's a perfect segue to you, Samira. So help us understand both kind of the relationship between global norms. Do we need more of a global consensus? And how does that relate to how decisions are made at a country level?
Complicated question, but it is possible. I think we cannot shy away with the belief that data is the only way to truly understand the scale, the impact, both direct and indirect, of COVID. And it is also the only way with data can we ensure that our response is precise and effective. So that is a given. And also we have several at a multilateral and national level, various frameworks, various guidance, principles, and policies. I also understand that the chief statisticians from various UN agencies are discussing an approach to consensus in terms of suggesting the way forward. It is important because it is not only intergovernmental organizations, but since there are many players in the space now, various stakeholders, we all ought to come together to put a path forward based on the principles that have already been established, which I mentioned earlier. I think we have the tools, we have the technology, we are coming forward with the philosophy and actions towards a trust. So I think we should be able to implement a sound governance mechanism so we can really bring timely, reliable, and actionable data, as well as I said in the beginning, trust in God. So I think it is possible and we should pursue. Thank you.
Well, thank you. The six of you have really helped me increase the conviction that in truth, that having trust around data governance is a society-wide endeavor. You have illustrated that beautifully. It is very complicated, toggling from global standards to kind of citizen engagement at the national level. I will say that I've taken away from you a couple of really important themes. One of them is that good governance of data is not just about protection, it's about enabling use. And the data protection is an enabler of use. So the dichotomy between protection and use is false. They are mutually enforcing. You've really underscored the importance of transparency. The iteration has to happen among so many different actors at so many different levels that if we don't have transparency around how those iterations are happening and decisions are being made, we're sunk. And I really want to underscore something that Jenny brought in early in the conversation was the need for adaptive governance. We are learning as we go. COVID has taught us that. There is so much more we do not know. And so any governance structure, any dialogue platform, it needs to be able to iterate and be transparent about how that reflection and learning is happening. So the final thing that I just want to underscore that you have helped us see is the important role that disinformation is playing in our world right now. And it really emphasizes the need for this trust and open dialogue to combat what is really not only kind of frustrating, but life-threatening to have disinformation in the time of COVID. And so the trust that you are all trying to foster is not only kind of good from a data governance perspective, it is good from a public health and life-saving perspective. So on that note, you all have brought us so much wisdom. Thank you so much for everything you've brought today. You've really stuck to time and brought in a lot of content. I would like to close us out in this session with a brief video around World Statistics Day. As I said, the theme for World Statistics Day today is about trust. And so we're going to see a quick video that talks about trust, kind of the importance of authoritative data, innovation in the public good and national statistical systems. So over to you, World Statistics Day, to inspire us and take us into our day.